All right, well, welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. So I am Shay Hata with the Buy Sell Love Chicago team. We are here to talk about moving to the burbs. For those of you who are thinking about potentially making that big shift from the city to the burbs. We are residential realtors in the Chicagoland area. We usually help about 150 to 175 people buy or sell property every year. We typically do about 50 to 60 million in volume, and we work both in the city of Chicago as well as in the suburbs, which we are going to talk about today. So I wanted to let my fabulous business partners, Lauren and David, take it a second to introduce each of them.
Hi, I'm David Svodich, David C. On the team, and I have been in the real estate industry about 15 years. Currently, I live in the city, but I actually grew up in the western suburbs and work with a lot of clients in the suburbs also, split about evenly between buying and selling. So know the city market and the suburbs market, and actually help a lot of people with that transition. So a lot of what we sometimes do is we're able to help people in the city and the suburbs. So we work with people on both sides of that. So welcome.
And my name is Lauren Calderon, and I have about 10 years of real estate experience in the industry. And I also come from a family of realtors as well. So we just kind of live, breathe, and eat real estate. I also grew up in the Western Burbs, similar to David. And we help all of our buyers from the North Shore to the Western Burbs to the Western Burbs and the city. So we really just advocate, for our clients' needs and can help you if you're thinking about making this big move.
So let's jump right into our first question. So how is the market in the burbs? This is always kind of the question that we get from people. It is busy, with COVID really changed kind of the dynamic in the burbs. Before COVID, the burbs were struggling a little bit in a lot of the different burbs. A lot of people were moving back to the city. They wanted to be near shops and restaurants and all of those things. And so the city was very popular and the burbs were struggling a little bit more. We saw that shift dramatically with COVID because people needed more space, particularly working from home. They needed office space. They wanted home gyms, they wanted backyards. And so the burbs became very attractive to people, especially because most people are not having to commute to the loop anymore 5 days a week. If they're having to commute, it's maybe 1-2 days a week, but they're not having to go in 5 days a week. So what we're hearing from a lot of our buyers is they would rather move to the burbs, have more space, get more for their money, and do the longer commute 1 or 2 days a week, since they can telecommute from home the other portion of the week. I don't see that changing. I think that genie is out of the bottle. I think it's going to be really hard for companies to make employees go back into the office 5 days a week going forward. So I think for the foreseeable future, we're going to see a very strong suburban market, simply because people are able to work from home, 2-3 days a week. So I really don't ever see that changing. So that leads us kind of to our second question of when is a good time to buy?
This is sort of, we look at this in terms of two, like what is, in terms of, timing for yourselves. It's, Shay talked about the market, this next year, we're looking, interest rates are still low historically, they're kind of ticking up. But with this year looking to be a solid time, just sort of, we think, especially in the first half, we also have to think about the suburban schedule. People always used to talk about the traditional real estate market starting after the Super Bowl. The suburban market tends to lag a little bit because people more often are tied to the school calendar. So they want, to be able to oftentimes be able to finish out the school year. So you'll see more volume coming on in most suburbs, more in sort of the February, March range. So people are going to be closing, because generally you close about 45 to 60 days after you go under contract. So a lot of people are going to want to come in that range. So they start closing in May and June. So that's sort of gross time, big picture timing. These days, a lot of people are also asking for post-possession closing, just because they haven't identified properties. As the market is still pretty hot, they need to identify properties. People want to get their property under contract, so they're solid in their sale, so will have that and don't have to have a home sale contingency. So they may say, you know what, we're putting this house on the market, but if you're putting in an offer, we'd like to rent back for a month. So that actually might give you an extra month of you need to factor in. So starting to look really in late January, February, probably is a good time to start looking if you're looking to close sort of in that May or later phase. But, there are houses that come on every week. So it's always good to be keeping your eye out to the market.
And I would say, for people who are moving from the city to the suburbs, you want to have identified, as David said, by like January, which suburbs you want to be on. That process often takes a long time to figure out which suburbs are the right suburbs for you. So you may need to start your search in the fall, or maybe a year in advance of when you want to move, so that you have 3 to 6 months just to figure out what suburbs make the right sense for you, what type of property you want. Do you want a ranch? Do you want a 2-story? Do you want something with a basement, right? Like all of those things are going to shift where you're looking. And so it really is a longer process. The other thing is that we are seeing tons of multiple offers in the suburbs. It is not uncommon for our clients to, be involved in multiple offer situations. And so if you're losing out on multiple offers, you're going to need to build more time in as well, potentially, because if you lose out on a multiple offer, you've got to start the process all over again. So, I think giving yourself in the city, it's very easy to find a good property in a month, 6 weeks. In the suburbs, you might need to give yourself 3, 4, 5 months to find a great property and get under contract. So let's hop to our third question, which we're all going to pitch in and answer, which is, what do you like about living in the burbs? Lauren, do you want to start this one?
Yes, so I actually just moved to the Western Burbs, and coming from South Loop the past 10 years, I was definitely nervous about what my everyday life would look like again. And I really couldn't be happier. It's been very nice and convenient to be able to drive to grocery stores and pharmacies and the mall and just have a parking spot is one of the main reasons. And also too, just to be able to have a yard was huge. I mean, coming from a high-rise building with a little balcony that we barely drink coffee on, to have our own yard and just privacy has just been, amazing while spending so much time at home.
And I would say for me, I moved to Wilmette from the Roscoe Village area several years ago. We have a son, he's 5 now. At the time when we moved, he was 2. And for us, we loved living in the city. We loved walking to shops and restaurants and music classes and things for him. But as he got bigger, one, he had a lot more stuff. And so we just felt like we were tight on space in the city. And so we wanted more housing space to be able to have stuff for him, have a playroom for him as he got older, as Lauren said, have a backyard. That was really our saving grace during COVID, is that we got a giant play set and put it in our backyard. We would go out there with him, kick the ball around. And I really wanted an environment where, there would be lots of kids on our street, that he could ride his bike up and down the sidewalk, learning how to ride it and feel very safe without a ton of cars whizzing by. And I wanted that kind of small town feeling where I would go to, downtown Wilmette, and we knew the pizza guy the first time we stopped in. He was really friendly. And every time after that we would walk by, he'd say, "Hey, Oliver, how are you? Come on in." He'd give him a popsicle out of the back. Sometimes he'd give him a quarter. The wine lady, you just text her your order. She drops it off on your front porch and you Venmo it to her. So I just really like that small town feeling of living in the burbs. And it is much easier. My husband loved the free parking spaces. He was so tired of paying for parking and constantly getting tickets in Chicago. So he loved that we don't ever get tickets in the suburbs. It's free parking everywhere. And there's just been funny things that have popped up, like we were bicycling to little downtown Wilmette with my son one day to have dinner, and a cop stopped us, and we thought, oh boy, what did we do? We're in trouble. Cop gets out of the car and we're like, oh man. And instead the cop walks over to my kid and says, "I'm so excited to see that you're wearing your helmet. Here's a coupon for a free ice cream at the free ice cream place in town," right? It's kind of that Mayberry feeling, at least in my suburb, of just people really being friendly and helping each other. And so I guess, that's what I love living about in the burbs. David, do you want to talk about what you liked about growing up in the burbs?
Sure. I mean, I should tell everyone I live in the city currently, but I grew up in the suburbs, and I'm a big believer. We had space, we had neighbors, we had all of that. Room to spread out in. That unless you're buying a $3 million house in a lot of the Chicago neighborhoods, you're not going to be getting. If you can get it, it's the trade-off. At the same time, I also like that you can be in a Chicago suburb, particularly if you're on the suburbs on the metro lines and be quickly in town. I went to high school in the city, near just outside of the Loop. I had a shorter commute than my friends did in the city. I could be from the western suburbs to high school within about 35, 40 minutes, depending on the train schedule. So, I mean, it's the great thing about our suburbs, and depending on which one you live in, is you can take advantage of the city and also take advantage of sort of the suburban openness and space, all the space. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, you have to choose one or the other. You can really get to choose the parts of those that you enjoy most, especially with our great public transport system.
Absolutely. So that brings us to, what do you not like about living in the burbs? So I know for me and for my husband, we're foodies. We like really good food. That has been the biggest struggle about living in the suburbs, is that there are good restaurants, but they are much fewer and far between, and the quality of the food typically is not as good as in the city, so we do still find ourselves driving into the city for date night, to go to a really good restaurant, to go to a play, kind of those bigger like event type of things. That's the main thing that we find that we miss about living in the burbs. Other than that, that's really it. We don't really find that we miss the city at all. I like that the grocery stores are bigger in the suburbs. It's easier to find things that you need in them. So really for us, it's the restaurants. David, what about you? What about, was there anything you didn't like growing up in the suburbs?
No, I mean, I think that sort of the things that I liked about the city, they're just, the thing is, I live on the lakefront right now. We didn't have water in the western suburbs, but that's something you can get if you live on the North Shore. I mean, I think it all sort of depends upon it. So there's something I would say, it's just sort of the trade-offs and sort of what was important at the time. I mean, I think it all has to do with that. The thing we always talk about in our business is the thing that we help people the most with is negotiating the trade-offs of what's most important to you. Is it geography? Is it size? Is it space? And its amenities? And this is a really big part of that. I mean, and location is the element. So nothing, inherent, because you can sort of get all these things. It just ends up being time and travel and figuring out which of those things at this point in your life make the most sense for you and your family.
Lauren, what about you? Anything you don't like about living in the burbs so far? Or you grew up in the burbs as well, so anything you didn't like growing up there?
I would say the restaurants too, and just being able to, in the summer, take advantage of like rooftops and being able to see the skyline views. They're only a metro ride away, as David was saying, in most of the, surrounding Chicagoland suburbs, which is really nice. So you could still go to date night and, be downtown in a half hour if you do take the metro. But I think most of all, too, a little bit, you kind of miss the noise sometimes. But that's something that you get used to. And, now it's just nice to be on a relaxing, quiet street without a lot of traffic.
And I think one thing we hear from our clients sometimes about what they don't like about living in the burbs is walkability, right? For me, it was very important that I still had that walkability. So we made sure to buy very close to downtown Wilmette so we could walk there to go to shops and restaurants. But one of the things that's different about living in the suburbs is typically the closer you are to the downtown, which is usually where the metro stops are, the more expensive the housing is going to be, because people want that walkability to the metro as well as to the downtown shops and restaurants. So the farther you get out from the metro and the downtown area, which is typically where the metros are located, the cheaper it ends up being. So, if you are not walkable to the kind of shops and the restaurants, that can be hard for people. I think one thing I also didn't think about in my suburb is that there are tons of parks and playgrounds, but I find people aren't in them very often. And so oftentimes, like Oliver and I go to the playground and we're kind of the only ones there. I don't know where the other kids are, whereas like Evanston, I always see tons of people in the parks and the playgrounds. And so it's not as fun to go to the park when you're there by yourself, right? And in my neighborhood, it tends to be a lot of nannies at the playgrounds versus other moms. And so it hasn't been a great way for me to meet other moms. So oftentimes we'll drive to Evanston where I can meet other moms and there's lots of other kids. So, there's a few quirky things I think about, the various suburbs that are just a little bit different. So let's hop into the next question about what are some surprising things living in the burbs. So a lot of times there are some big differences about living in the burbs versus the city. First of all, some of the burbs can be on well water and on a septic tank rather than city sewer. So that's a big surprise for people. So you always want to take a look at that, and figure out, are you comfortable being on a well, and are you comfortable being on a septic tank? Because if you aren't, you're going to really want to pay attention to that in the MLS listings. Also, some of the burbs are what we call unincorporated areas. So they're not actually part of like the village or the city. What that means is that if you're in the unincorporated area, it's kind of like the Wild West in those areas. Your property taxes are going to be lower, and you don't have to follow kind of the rules of any of the villages. So you have more flexibility about what you build on your property and what you do to your property, because you don't necessarily have to have it approved by the village or the city. But there are some downsides. Your property taxes are lower because a lot of things are not included in your property taxes, and you have to pay for them separately, like going to the library. You have to pay to get a library card if you're in those areas. You have to pay for your own trash pickup in those areas because that's not included in your property taxes. You're not also covered by emergency services. So you're not in the designated area for like fire, EMT, and police. So if you have an emergency and you make a 911 call, there is no dedicated emergency, people that are going to come to you. They kind of reach out to the surrounding areas, and whoever is available will come to you. So it can be a little bit of a longer wait if you're in the unincorporated areas. Because of that, we oftentimes find the unincorporated areas are a little bit harder to sell. There are certainly a segment of buyers who don't want to be in them. And so that can be a little bit, take longer for you to sell and be a little bit harder for your resale. So that's something you're going to want to keep in mind. Some other things we've noticed about living in the burbs are, as Lauren said, it's really quiet. That was a hard thing for my husband to get used to. He was like, it's so dark out here and it's very quiet. Some burbs have sidewalks, some don't. That was really important to me that we had sidewalks in the burb that we moved to. I wanted my son to be able to ride his bike on the sidewalk and feel safe. So you're going to want to look at those things and see, are there sidewalks? Do you care about well and septic? Do you care about the incorporated area versus the unincorporated area? So those are kind of the surprising things we have found. David, Lauren, any other surprises you can think about living in the burbs?
Yeah, I mean, I think not just suburbs. I just think it's, certain things you'll find more easily, some things you'll find, and it's really can also be dependent on the suburbs. We talk about, the suburbs. It also depends. The further you go out, the quieter it's going to be. You look in terms of suburbs, we always think of sort of, in between sort of hybrid suburbs. You can get an Oak Park or an Evanston. If you're looking for something that's a little bit not quite still living in the city, might have a different character, the schools might be different, you might get that. So a lot of these things, they're going to be more prevalent in some communities than others. And that's why research and taking time to visit them and talking to realtors and people make a huge difference.
I think one other thing too that made me think of is like commutes, right? I thought that the commute to the North Shore would be terrible, and it really wasn't that bad depending on what time I left. So like when my husband before COVID was having to drive down to the Loop every day for work, he changed his schedule so that he could leave at 6 a.m. and he would be door to door in 25 minutes because there was no traffic at 6. But if he left at 7, then it would take him an hour, right? So sometimes the commute can be avoided if you're just able to adjust your time. So I would say that's one thing. If you're thinking about moving to the burbs and you are going to have to commute, drive from the city or wherever your office is to where you're thinking about living during your normal commute time, so you can see what that is like, because some of those highways and expressways get really backed up. So Lauren, anything you can think of that was surprising about moving to the burbs?
No, I think just really the street lights at night too. It's just really dark and there's not as many people walking around. So I think that's something to get used to too.
Perfect. All right. So which burb is the best for me? Lauren, you want to take this one?
So, we help our clients with this question all the time. And the biggest advice we can give to you is definitely take a day or a weekend and go out to lunch or dinner there at different times of the day or night and walk around and see how you feel. Like with some of our clients, having, not a cookie cutter suburb and having a lot of pretty different architecture to look at is, really prevalent in areas such as like Oak Park or Evanston, where it has a little bit more of a historical feel, where some clients do prefer more of a, suburb like that has a cul-de-sac and, maybe amenities that have a community pool and things like that. So I would really recommend that you just do some research. And also, we always tell our clients, we have all clients in a lot of different suburbs on the North Shore, the Western Burbs, and we can always connect you to our clients to give you, their firsthand experience on the schools. And, a lot of the times we've set up play dates for our clients that have just moved to town that have kids around the same age as well, just to get a really good feel of what that suburb life would look like for them in that town.
And I think Facebook groups can be really helpful here, especially, like I'm a part of several moms groups, so Mama Hive Chicago is a really popular one. That's a great place to ask questions about, hey, I'm thinking about moving to Downers Grove or Arlington Heights or whatever it is. What do you like about living there? What don't you like about living there? In the North Shore, there's North Shore Mom Spot, so almost every suburb has several Facebook groups for that suburb. That's a great way to get on those Facebook groups, kind of monitor what people are talking about, what they're saying their gripes are with the neighborhood or area, and then also for you to ask questions as well. And then I think it's really important for you to figure out what is going to be important to you in a neighborhood, and this is going to sound like silly stuff, but I really love the library. I love to read. And so having a nice library that I could take my son to and try to instill that love of learning and reading in him was really important to me. And so when we were looking at suburbs in the western suburbs and the northern suburbs, we went to the libraries so I could check them out. We also went to the public pools. We went to the restaurants, the shops, all of those things. I decided I really wanted to be close to the lake. So we would go check out the beaches on the lake and figure out which ones we liked, which areas had playgrounds we liked, so make that list of where are you going to actually be spending your time, and then go check out those places, and that can help you narrow down areas as well. David, anything you want to add on that one?
No, I mean, I think going on discussion groups and, going out and seeing and asking people, these are sort of figuring out the things that are most important to you. It's like anything when you're assessing not just the type of home you need, but the type of neighborhood you need. I mean, doing a really good needs assessment, and, we have good tools to share with you in terms of doing that. But there's nothing different. The best way to do it sometimes is go and just go look at open houses, because not only does that allow you to sort of see the homes and sort of think about that, but it also allows you to drive around the neighborhood. Because when you're driving and looking at homes, you start looking at neighborhoods in a different way. It's not just like, going off to grandmother's house and driving through the streets. When you're sort of looking at individual homes, you're going to pay attention to details that you probably didn't see otherwise.
Yep. And I think that's also a good point. Look up to see what's around that neighborhood, right? Like we almost put an offer in on a house that, then we realized was several streets over from the Northwestern football stadium. And we were like, you know what, we don't want to be that close to crazy noise and tailgating and partying and things like that. And certainly in the Western suburbs, we've had clients who don't want to be near power plants. And kind of different environmental hazards, so make a list of those as well. That can kind of help you steer away from certain neighborhoods. So that brings us to which burbs have walkable downtowns, which, that's a question we always get from clients. David, you want to take this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we've got our favorites of neighborhoods. I mean, the great thing is, when you look at the communities that are most likely to have walkable downtowns, it tends to be those on metro lines, because these are all communities that sort of grew up and they grew up along the route. So they all have, to some extent, some type of community. You look at, as we said, sort of our hybrid suburbs, Oak Park and Evanston, they have sort of multiple different downtowns. They have different sections. So you're going to get a lot of those in those communities. And then, if you sort of think to the north, I mean, Wilmette has absolutely, Shay can talk to that amazing, delightful walking town. Highland Park, Lake Forest on the North Shore. Arlington Heights, sort of Deerfield, as you're kind of cranking a little bit further towards the Northwest. LaGrange, Elmhurst, Hinsdale, in terms of the western suburbs, that's something that we're very lucky in. They all generally tend to be right around the metro tracks. So, but that's where you tend to have a lot of your community things. It's where you also have sort of your town halls and things like that. So you definitely have a little bit of nexus in terms of those. And something that has changed so much over the last 15 to 20 years is there's really been a return to those downtowns. A lot of things had moved out to sort of main streets and strip malls, and communities invest a lot in their downtowns. So if you grew up in an area and think you sort of knew the downtown, but you say, oh, they don't have much of a downtown, go back and check. There are a lot more local stores. And I grew up Western Springs, Hinsdale. There were no restaurants there. I mean, when a Michelin starred restaurant opened in Western Springs, I was like, what's going on here? I mean, it's crazy. So once again, it always comes down to the driving too. What are the ones that I haven't named that you guys can think of that you're fans of?
Well, and then also too, I just moved back to the burbs. And what's great is even if you're just in one burb, chances are you're only about 10-minute drive to a lot of the other surrounding burbs. So,
Yeah.
I'm in Clarendon Hills, and it's great because I'm 10 minutes from downtown LaGrange, which has a ton of nightlife and, where my husband do date night all the time. And then I'm, 10 minutes away from downtown Downers, which also has, fun shops and retail, and then 10 minutes away from Elmhurst. So just because you're in one burb doesn't mean that you just have that one downtown. We're happy to always just guide you and tell you what things are close by, but chances are, you can visit surrounding downtowns and, then have a variety to choose from when you're just thinking about things to do and activities.
I would add Winnetka to that list. They have kind of two fantastic downtown areas. Highland Park, I can't remember if you mentioned that one as well. That has a great downtown area. I love Lake Forest downtown. And I think one thing to check out too is kind of what kinds of offerings do they have in the downtown beyond shops and restaurants? And again, I love living in a place that's like Mayberry. And so I love that Park and Rec puts on a 4th of July parade in downtown Winnetka. The first time we went, my husband looked at me and he was like, oh my gosh, Shay, this is your jam, right? Because it's all these little kids waving little flags and you have all these cute floats, local floats going by. And I mean, it really is like a 4th of July parade that you see on a movie, right? I love that in Wilmette, they have a tree lighting ceremony and they have people out singing Christmas songs and carolers, and they have Santa there. So look at Park and Rec, and look at the website for the village and see if you can kind of get a taste of what kind of events they have going on in their downtown areas as well, if that's important to you at all. So we're going to jump into school question. We get a lot of questions about what are the differences between the schools in the burbs and the schools in Chicago. So I'm a mom, I have a 5-year-old who is in kindergarten. This was really the primary reason that we decided to move to the burbs. Average class size in most schools in Chicago for elementary is 36 kids. I just felt like my child would not do well in a class size that large. And that was really the motivating factor for us to move to the burbs. Most burbs average class size is like 18 to 20, maybe 22. So it tends to be much smaller in the burbs. I also really liked that the burbs tends to have bus transportation available for the kids. In Chicago, there is no bus transportation unless your child is special needs. Otherwise, you are responsible for driving your child to school. In the suburbs, it's your traditional, you have a bus stop, all the kids from the neighborhood meet there, your kid gets on the bus and goes to school. And I really wanted that experience for my child, where they could get to know the other kids at the school bus, have a little bit of independence. That was important to me. In general, and again, this varies depending on your suburb, but the suburban schools tend to be much better funded than the Chicago schools. So when we were looking at schools and neighborhoods, I actually went and toured every single school in like Winnetka, Wilmette, Glencoe, Kenilworth, et cetera, as we were trying to narrow down our neighborhoods, because I wanted to make sure that I really liked the school. And you'll see that they have libraries, they have art, they have music. The Wilmette schools have 3D printers and media labs where the kids can learn how to make videos. So they just have a ton of resources that oftentimes aren't available in the Chicago schools due to budget constraints. I also find the suburban schools tend to, at least during COVID, they've been in school most of the time. The Chicago schools have had a lot of issues with COVID, with teacher strikes. And so they've been in and out. And we've had a lot of parents calling us and saying, we just can't deal with CPS anymore. It's just, we never know if our kid's going to have school or not, and it's stressful. We want something that's more consistent for our child. And I have found the suburbs tend to be more consistent with having the kids in school, with all of this craziness going on. David, Lauren, anything else you can think of that are differences between the schools in the burbs and the schools in Chicago?
One thing I just point out, when you look at MLS listings, generally they will list the school district and oftentimes the school. It's always good to check on it. all suburbs, much just like in the city, not every school, the schools are not always the same. If you look at sort of, especially the larger suburbs, there are different districts within the same suburbs. So you definitely want to be doing sort of specific school-based research and sort of knowing that, you know, we definitely, I mean, before we're going and taking you out, we're making sure, I know when you say you want to be suburb X, but you want to be in a school of this sort, sometimes that means there are just some schools are not going to fit within the community. So don't assume just because it's X suburb that it's always going to be the same caliber of school across the board, because they're different. So schools vary, and also that's not all, they're not the same district. One other thing also in terms of some suburbs share school districts. So sometimes you have really good school district that you might have one suburb that is a little bit more affordable than another. That might be something that's shared. So you might be able to find a home or a bigger home for the same price that might give you the same schools that you're really looking for, and you might be able to get a different home and a different values. So once again, you know, drilling that down, we're always happy to talk about this and help you figure that out. So you need to triple check in terms of schools when going out there.
And I think one thing to think about too is the ages in the schools. Most of the Chicago schools are K-8. And I know for me, I didn't want my child in a K-8 school. I felt like that was just a lot for him to be with 8th graders. You know, so part of the reason we picked Wilmette is that it's K-4th grade in the elementary. They tend to be small. Then they go to middle school, which is 5-8 before they go to high school. You know, so figure out, do you want a K-8 experience? Do you want something smaller? You know, I think the other big difference is that, you know, typically in the suburbs, your only option is your neighborhood school. In Chicago, you do have more options because you can go to your neighborhood school, or you can apply to up to 20 other schools. You can test in for like selective enrollment. There's magnet schools, you know, so there are a lot more choices in Chicago than there typically are in the suburbs. So you have to figure out if that's important to you or not, as well. I did pull up, there's a lot of research online. So Chicago Parent Magazine comes out with a list every year of kind of what they consider the best high schools. And so these are the top 15 high schools according to Chicago Parent Magazine. Niche is another great site that has a lot of school rankings that you can go to look at. You know, with these, I would think about the size of the school. Like for instance, New Trier is huge. You know, New Trier is about 4,500 students. You know, some of these other schools are smaller. So, you know, think about what size of school do you want? And also think about, if you're going to have kids, are they going to be there through high school? You know, a lot of times people come to us and they're thinking that this house in the suburbs is really only going to be for 5 or 10 years. So in that case, you really probably only need to look at the elementary, maybe the middle school. You may not be there all the way through high school. So I think it's important to think about, how long are you going to be in this school? Do you even need to worry about the high schools? All right, so what if I hate the burbs once I move there? Lauren, do you want to take this one? Because I know you were really concerned recently.
Yes.
The burbs about this.
So living in the city the past 10 years, you know, even though I grew up in the burbs, it's just, you know, it's a lifestyle change. And, you know, with change comes the nervous feelings. And, you know, I think that if it's a change that you're thinking of that makes sense, you know, for your long-term needs in terms of you need more space, you need the work from home space, or you need a yard for your dog, or you're pregnant and, you know, just need more room for your family, I think moving to the burbs is kind of a sense of relief. You know, once I was so worried to get there, and then once I got there, I was just like, oh, wow, okay, you just have more space to breathe. And worst case scenario, if you absolutely don't love living in the burbs, you can always move. And, you know, I think you're in a good spot if you did have to move and you tried it out. And, you know, for the next year and a half, if you absolutely are just like, I need to get back to the city, you know, we're definitely thinking that the suburbs are trending up for a while, and, you know, it should be easy for you to sell. So there's lots of options. You could either rent out your place in the burbs, which the rental market in the suburbs has just been crazy just with how low inventory is. So, you know, you have options if you absolutely make the move and it's not for you.
So that brings us to our last question. What should I do next? David, you want to take this one?
Well, as Shay said, you know, the first thing you want to do is really figure out what suburb makes the most sense for you. So if you haven't started that part of the process, we definitely would encourage you to start doing your research. Can't think of a more fun time of year to be out driving or out and taking communities. I mean, every suburb has their downtown decorated and things sort of in their best form right now. So it's a great time to decorate, especially over the holidays, as you have time, maybe just going out and checking things out by day as well as by night. So the first thing we definitely encourage is to figure out what community works. And it's been part of that, we are happy to help with that in terms of, when we work with buyers, we do a really extensive needs assessment. So if you haven't figured that out, we're happy to talk through, and you can tell us sort of, these are the things we're looking for in a community. We'll be happy to help you identify sort of a short list and say, you know what, why don't we go out, we'll look at 2 houses in each of these 3 communities, maybe 2 on the North Shore and 1 West, see what it feels like for you and sort of move, we can see how we can move from there. That's what next, and then going after to open houses. And as we said, if you're looking to be moving this in the spring, starting to look in January, it is the time to start looking. So it is not too soon.
And I would say, if you are unsure about it and you want to try to rent in the suburbs rather than buying, that's certainly an option. I will be very honest, it is very hard to find rentals in the suburbs. There are very few of them, especially if you want something updated and move-in ready. That's basically like trying to find a unicorn. We just did a search recently for a client. I think it was in Glenview or Winnetka, and there were 3 rentals. I mean, that was it. So there just aren't a lot of rental options, so if that's something that you want to do, typically those rentals go on in the summertime, because again, people want to move during the summer when their kids aren't at school. So the rest of the year, it's going to be very slim pickings. Usually landlords put rentals on about 60 to 75 days before the rental is available for you to move into. So, biggest kind of move-in date is like June 1st, July 1st, August 1st. So you're going to want to start looking kind of 60 to 75 days before those time periods. That's when those rentals are going to come on. Expect to pay a premium because there are so few options in the suburbs. Landlords know that. And so they charge an arm and a leg typically for those properties. So you're probably going to be paying a lot more to rent than you potentially would be to buy. So I would say meet with a lender, kind of hash those numbers out and see what makes more sense for you in terms of renting or buying. Some clients of ours have done is they've gone and rented an Airbnb in the suburbs and gone and stayed there for a week to kind of get a flavor of what that suburb is like. And then a month or 2 later, they'll try another one. That's a great way to kind of really get a sense of what it's like to live in that suburb as well. So that was everything we were going to go over. We really appreciate you being here with us today. If you have any questions, our phone numbers are on here. Please feel free to reach out to us. These are our cell phone numbers, so you can call or text us anytime. You can also email us. Our emails are on our website, which is buyselllovechicago.com. We're here to answer any questions that you have, and help you potentially make that move to the suburbs. So thank you for joining us, everybody, today. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.